Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to my video podcast on the future of business and technology. My guest today is New York Times bestselling author and the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association, Gary Shapiro, to talk about his brand new book, Pivot or Die: How Leaders Thrive When Everything Changes. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you so much for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you with me. Thank you for allowing me to read your book before it comes out. I really enjoyed it. Where are you joining us from today?
I am outside Detroit, Michigan, where my family lives. I actually work in Washington, D.C., where our offices are located right outside, actually, Northern Virginia, outside of D.C.
Very good. And when you don't write books, how do you spend your time?
How do I spend my time? Well, I have a pretty much full-time job trying to represent 1,300 technology companies that make up the CTA. It's a non-governmental, nonprofit organization that owns and produces CES, but we also do a tremendous amount in public policy, standards, market research, promoting the industry. So I am, in a sense, the full-time paid cheerleader for the consumer technology industry. But
Amazing.
I also try to balance my life with exercise, good nutrition, try to get a little sleep, and I have a pretty active family. Seems like I'm spending weekends lately on the road, going to traveling. We call it soccer. You would call it football games with my 12-year-old son and my wife.
Lovely. Yeah, this is how I spend most of my weekends. I've got two boys and a daughter, and both of them are playing football or soccer. So, yes, this is my normal Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, you realize your social life revolves around the random collection of people that are parents of other similar soccer players.
Absolutely. Um, so as someone that sits right in the middle of the tech world, I would love to understand what inspired you to write Pivot or Die, and how do you think the concept of pivoting is so crucial in today's landscape?
I've always been fascinated with how people and businesses make decisions because my career, which is several decades working with tech companies around the world and CEOs and government officials, like how do people get to where they are? How do the businesses make those changes? And a lot of reflection and a psychology major and reading a lot of books is that, as human beings, we are focused almost entirely mentally on preserving the status quo because we humans are not usually able to change quickly. We love our parents when we're little kids, and then we grow up, and we all change. People get older, they die, things go on. We go through different stages in life, and that is something which, like, how do you make those big decisions? And even more in the last few years, as I um, head towards the other side of my career, is that a lot of younger people are just seeking guidance, and they have questions and they have stress that you could just feel. And the
Hmm.
stress is, how do I decide, like, what college to go to? What do I major in? Oh my gosh, my first job, what should I take? And those are big questions for them. But I've come to a conclusion that there's only a few big decisions personally that you make, and everything else you should go with the flow. And the four big decisions you make personally are: am I going to commit a felony, a major crime? Am I going to do something extremely unsafe? Get drunk and drive, for example. And those two decisions, those should be easy to make, those decisions. So you could take those off the table, but make sure you make them the right way. And then there's two other decisions. One is having kids, which seems to take up your life forever. And that's definitely life changing in a time consuming way. And also, somewhat related to that, usually is, do I marry someone? Who's my partner, and make that type of commitment. And that's a big decision. That's not irrevocable, but it is a big one. So those two are the big ones. But how my wife and I have been able to get off the dime on some of the big decisions, like, do we move? Do we uh, buy this home? Is we're not making lifetime commitments here. This is just a few years, and we can get through this. In fact, if our whole lives are lived in few year increments, whether it's the different schools we go to or different stages of life. In those few years, you could almost do anything for a few years. And every one of those few year experiences builds on the next one. So you learn a lot more about yourself, and you kind of know what you're doing. So why did I write the book, which is really the question. Well, the immediate cause was COVID. Uh, the silver lining in the COVID cloud was that businesses and people made a lot of big decisions, and they were good ones, especially in the business world, I felt, because the business decisions were all of a sudden, instead of like a lot of cookie cutter companies replicating themselves, they were forced to try things differently. Because in a lot of companies, the way they make decisions, first of all, in big companies, it's very difficult to make decisions. That's why I believe innovators and small entrepreneurs have a an advantage. But big companies, they kind of look at the status quo and they seem to not assume that everyone else is also, and they figure where they want to go, but they don't realize that everyone else is having that same analysis and going the same place. I think that ended during COVID. Companies had to pivot. They didn't have a choice. Everyone had to pivot. And that's what led to the book is the thinking process for pivots, the reason people make decisions in personal life, in your business life, and even how big businesses and especially technology companies have made decisions.
So how would you differentiate pivoting from traditional innovation, transformation, and so on?
Well, pivoting is a real change in direction, and it's major. On the other hand, even in my home life, when things go bad, um, mentally, I say I have to pivot away. I have to focus on this interview with you, even though something terrible just happened. In my wife's world, where she's a surgeon, she's talked about how like you go from one case to another, and something you have a bad result, you got to start over. In the world of trade shows, which I'm involved in as well, uh, when you're manning or peopling or staffing a trade show booth or trade show stand, it's something where it's a pretty intense activity for several days, or at least a day, if not 4 or 5 days. And you have to move from one person to the next person. You have to keep pivoting your mind. Those
Mhm.
that are busy business people, they're pivoting all the time in a sense that they're doing from one task to another. And at the CEO level, I think that's especially true, where you really have to mentally move yourself and with discipline to just move forward and go on to the next thing and not be bothered by what's occurred before. So pivoting takes on a lot of different words. There's in sports, obviously pivoting in basketball, or pivoting in various sports means you're changing direction. And that's what this is. Are you changing direction? Can you do it in an easy way? And can you do it with some emotional intelligence so you have the ability to actually look at yourself and how you're making the decision? And
Mhm.
are you making a good decision? And I felt for me during COVID, I had to make a lot of very big decisions,
Mm.
and and I recognized they were big decisions. And so I took the time on them. I analyzed. I spoke to a lot of people, as opposed to a very quick decision where in normal life where something bad happens and you just have to move on. Especially when you're dealing with kids, you just have to let things go off your shoulders and move on and not lose your cool.
Yeah, to bring this to life, I'd love you to share a particularly interesting case study from the book that illustrates the power of successful pivoting.
Well, I'll give two. I mean, one was we had to make a decision with CES as to
Mhm.
whether or not we went forward, and we first discussed it um, in, believe it or not, in early February, and then early March, at a board level of 2020, when it really hadn't even hit the US yet in any significant way. But we had decided at our board meeting, with the tea leaves on the wall, that we had to plan for a digital event in January, 10 months later, as well as maybe go hybrid. So we pivoted quickly, and that allowed our industry and us to plan ahead and to save a couple of thousand companies a lot of money when we announced in July, making the decision in June that we were going to have a digital only event 8 months later. No one had ever even come close to doing that in the events world. And that was the right decision. Some of my colleagues in the events world were not thrilled with it because it affected our decision, put a negative cloud on their optimism, which was, in my view, not realistic optimism
Mm.
based on how viruses have traditionally and vaccines have traditionally been made. So we used a lot of doctors, a lot of science, and we were there early on that one. So that was a good decision, and literally it ended up saving in our industry probably over $100 million at least if not more, in terms of hotel commitments, building exhibits, things like that, because is so grand. Another pivot, which is, and I'm not sure it's a popular product in Europe, but definitely in the United States, is something called Ring. It was first actually introduced it at the CES some time back. The Ring doorbell is a camera that you put on your door, and it didn't succeed at first. It was called the Doorbot. It was clunky. It was bad, and the the founder basically made a real quick pivot, a startup pivot, we call it, and just totally changed the name, changed the configuration, changed the factory, changed the marketing of it. And it just took off and it became a feature that's used for security purposes. Now, with home delivery of a lot of products, it's used to see if the delivery person's there, if someone's stealing the product. I mean, it's used actually to capture criminals. They've had to deal with some privacy issues, which are kind of strange to talk about, but it's a phenomenally successful product.
Very good examples. Do you have any examples of a company that failed to pivot and suffered the consequences, and what lessons can be learned from their experience?
Well, I'm seeing it today even. There's a lot going on now in the United States on electric cars. And I'm seeing companies go under because, first of all, they didn't recognize this change in society. But then some companies rush to electric and they put all their eggs in that basket. And it's not the take up on electric cars, to put it mildly, is not what the government and some of the major car companies thought it would be in the United States. The infrastructure is really not there. The demand is not there. People still want, they have fear. I mean, I could go into all the things about electric cars, but hybrid, which is the Toyota approach, is a good pivot that seems to be taking on a lot of and working. But in the Detroit area right now, it's tough because this is where the big three car makers in the U.S. are, and a lot of their suppliers. And I could tell you, I hear about it every day from friends, people. It's just a tough time. So the thing is, I mean, there's almost a double pivot there. I mean, people didn't go to electric at all, but then they didn't realize the benefit of the challenge rather of electric. All the different environments it doesn't work well on, the expense of replacing it, the fact that it's affected by salt, and salt is used in the winter climates here to treat the roads. The fact that the charging station infrastructure isn't there, that it's difficult for people who live in apartment buildings, people who go to airports, and people who travel long distance. So there's just so many reasons. I mean, like a lot of things in technology, you can make a good decision, but if your timing is off and it takes longer or it's quicker, you could get stuck with a lot of inventory, a lot of lack of revenue, and things like that. And then there's the external factors, obviously, which you just can't control, like the overall economy. Or like right now in the U.S., there seems to be a slowdown going on, and it's not only that; it's actually almost globally at this point. So that's affecting a lot of companies. And the question is, do they pivot? Do they let people go? Do they shift to a different category? There's so many different things to look at in companies, but just simply going along and thinking that the trend line you're on now is just going to continue forever is the biggest mistake.
So, how has your experience as CEO of the Consumer Technology Association and producer of CES shaped your perspective on pivoting in business?
Well, I've had the privilege. I have a great job. I mean, I've been in this job for 30 years as the head of the organization. I've started out as a student, actually working for a consulting firm, which was consulting to the organization. So on the one hand, I have a very limited sphere because I haven't worked at too many other places other than those type of university jobs and working in a congressional office for a while. But I did. Um, I do see on a regular basis for a long time now and get to know a number of CEOs of startups, of CEOs of mid-sized, and CEOs of big companies. And sometimes you actually develop real relationships with these people. Actually, you do, especially the ones that are engaged with us as volunteers. We spend a lot of time together. We solve problems together. We focus on advocacy, on real industry problems, whether they be product returns or just the economy. And you see their decision making and how they do things and how they even whether their skills that they have as CEOs translate into in a different environment where you're working with even some of your competitors on a joint project. And I see how some people have those skills and some people don't. And I also see that how the huge differences between entrepreneurs and the more corporate type of thinking. So in terms of how my thinking has evolved, it's a combination of all those observations and also hanging out in different worlds, whether it's the world of live events, because I'm on the board of a global events organization based in Europe that requires auditing of your trade show to be a member, which is rare in the US. And I'm happy because I think independent auditing is important. But also it's seeing those, these are very entrepreneurial people who create events. And the purpose of these events is to get people together to create innovation. So to me, everything's about innovation. And innovation means different things. At Starbucks, it's not that maybe their coffee is better. I don't really know, but their ambience is certainly better, and it's a business system they have and a brand name they built up. But it's to see all these different things about how you create something that has value, which is what innovation is. So the whole focus of my career has been on focusing on innovation and how it's requiring not only companies to pivot, but industries to pivot.
Mm.
I have long watched how industries respond in Washington to a lot of what the tech industry is doing. Now, the tech industry is displacing a lot of industries. With some people, to be honest, I am not popular because their industries, they view me as the enemy. I'm seeing that right now, frankly, in the broadcasting world, where we've had battles and cooperation over many different issues, whether it's high definition television or enhancing different forms of radio, or right now we're in a huge battle, which seems so insignificant in the scheme of things, but it's a philosophical one and a statutory one, which is there's a legislation rushing through Congress which would require that AM radio, analog AM radio, be mandatory in every car, in every vehicle. And it's a 100-year-old technology. It's what we started out on, as the Radio Manufacturers Association. And the sheen they're hiding behind is the safety argument, which really doesn't exist in any meaningful way because the numbers don't support it. But what's really going on is the AM radio world is going out of business, and they're looking for Congress to mandate that these technologies be around so they stay on. The FM radio world tried to mandate for phones about 10 years ago, and it failed. But we're not big on mandates. We're big on consumers choosing which products win and lose. But there's a lot of other battles going on. I mean, in other industries, we fought the motion picture industry over the legality of the VCR. We fought the music industry over the legality of MP3 and recording devices, and the internet itself, which they called a massive internet copying scheme. Authors and publishers have tried to make it so that it's difficult to access products, and that debate is still ongoing. We're not as engaged with that one as we have with others, but it is one that's real. I mean, what's the balance between authors and rights and the ability to use those rights to create something new, which is embedded in the copyright laws, at least in the United States. So there's a lot of issues out there with technology pivots and industry pivots. One of the industries I respect, which I think was part of your question, that's done something really well, is the cable industry in the United States. They realized that they're a pipeline for entertainment, but there are going to be other pipelines. So they actually invested as a whole in broadband deployment and as coming through the cable, because obviously it could come from Wi-Fi, it could even come from the power line, it can come from satellite, come from fiber optic. And they invested in cable franchises, which are monopolies for localities. And they came up with a way of doing it. And now they get a lot of money just as a big fat pipeline, which they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And they did it with a national standard, national testing lab, national basis. And they got like a few pennies from every subscriber to cable to fund the whole thing. It was brilliant.
In your book, you discuss 4 types of pivots. Which one do you think is the most challenging for leaders to execute, and why?
Well, the one that's most challenging to execute is when your back's against the wall and it's like you're throwing a Hail Mary pass and you don't know. I mean, your company's ready to go under. You're trying anything. So when you're in a losing position and you don't have a choice, it's called a failure pivot, basically. And you've just failed and you have to do something differently, either to save the company or save the product line or something. That's the most difficult. The second most difficult, though, is the success pivot, which is kind of the opposite. It's difficult mentally to do when you have a success and you're riding high. Wow, you just want more of it. So you keep building on the variation on that theme. I'll give Amazon as an example. I mean, it started out as a bookseller online, and the success natural thing that I think Jeff Bezos did was he kept adding different lines of industry to what he was selling to consumers, and kept going and going. He's still to this day. I mean, there's no shortage of them to add things, and they've become dominant in that. But the strangest thing he did, and I remember he brought this thing where he was speaking at a meeting we had, and he brought this little device with him early on, because we had him a few times, and early on, when I think maybe it was one of the first times he spoke, it was this little thing called you called it Kindle. And it's like, what are you doing? Like you bring this product that you're like the number one bookseller in the country already almost, and you're on your way to be, and you have this device that's going to compete with yourself. But in retrospect, like, I was puzzled. It was brilliant. I mean, create your own competition, do something different. In our own way, we just did that recently, but that was the thinking we had at the time. We're doing great as an organization. The CES is looking phenomenal for January in Las Vegas. We're strong. We get a lot of awards. It's a great place to work. We have loyal, I wouldn't call it a cult following, but people who really believe in the mission that we believe in, which is innovation. We just got recognized and partnered with the United Nations on adding technology as one of the fundamental human securities, in addition to the other things we've been working with them on, like access to food, healthcare, clean air, clean water, community, and how technology will do that. They had access to technology. A year ago, at this time, we stood on the steps of the UN with the UN official, and we announced this new additional security. So we are like riding high, and I am at the peak of my career, clearly. But we said, you know what? We're strong now. Let's update our look and our feel and what we're doing. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what we are and who we want to be, and we did it. And we did it on time and on budget, and we've announced it a few weeks ago. and it was disruptive to, because those things, it's tough to take a team and make everyone focus on something. The challenge with success, in my view, is that you think you're so freaking smart, when really you've been lucky in terms of your idea and your timing, and probably the work part of it is your execution. So, I think I'm going to switch subjects on you really quickly, if you don't mind. But being a parent, like, what's your job really? And you want to instill ethics in your kids. You want them to be healthy and safe, and you want them to be self-confident and happy. And you want to instill confidence in them, and that's not an easy thing to do. My three brothers and I, who are the most different people in the world and do different things, but one thing we marvel at is, what did our parents do differently that made us so self-confident to think that we could solve a lot of problems in our lives and in our jobs? And I don't know what it is, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But as a parent, you could do that. As an individual, you have to recognize that your self-confidence and your ego gets in the way of your ability to learn and to pivot. And that's when you're successful, most companies just stick with their success and have variations on a theme. It's like a classical music composer doing, you start out with your basic theme and you just build on it in a piece, and you have a successful piece, and it's very satisfying. But in a business, that's not satisfying. Steve Jobs figured it out. He figured out that, they're very successful with one category of product, and that's what they'd focus on. So he created Skunkworks, and he kept them quiet. And shockingly to me, he didn't do any real market research, because he was creating products that people didn't know they wanted. And he made it happen that way. But the Skunkworks aspect of it was really important, because otherwise the rest of the big corporation will eat you up.
Interesting. So what is stopping leaders then from pivoting?
Well, there's a lot of different environmental forces which do that. I mean, first is the leader's position in the organization. I mean, you could have the title of CEO, or whatever title, but if your board doesn't believe in you or support you, it's a lot more difficult to pivot. I mean, your board has to buy into the pivots you make, the big strategic pivots. That requires a certain level of confidence and trust. Your staff has to believe in you, because if you have people that aren't with the program, they could sabotage you. And, Jack Welch of GE, one of the things I learned early in my career that I really respect that he did is, there's 4 types of people that work for you. One is the people that make their numbers and are with the program. Those are great. Keep those people on. And the second type in the 2x2 grid are those that don't do either. They don't make their numbers and they're very negative. They don't agree with what you're doing. Get rid of those people. The other 2 boxes are the tougher boxes. One are the people who are with the program but don't make their numbers. Jack said, give those people another chance. But the people that are toughest are the people that make the numbers but are not with the program. And those are the ones that you just don't want to get these star performers. You don't want to give them up, but sometimes you have to. And I've gradually come to that conclusion. It's been very gradual with a lot of mistakes, is that you really want people, you don't want yes people, but you want people that are positive, that fit in with your culture really well, can work on a team, can be relied upon by their teammates, and understand that there's a big picture with our organization. Our entire focus is on innovation and promoting innovation globally to solve human problems. And that's something that's a pretty sacred mission for us, and that I think we believe in. Plus, we produced the coolest event where with, the coolest industry that I could come up with are all the different technology companies put together in one loop. And we have 1,300 of them as members, American companies, and we have 4,000 that exhibit at CES. So it's a dream job, a dream organization, and we attract the best and the brightest, which is great. We've gotten all these awards as a great place to work and healthy environment, and we're in a position to do a lot of things that others aren't. We're a nonprofit. We don't have to, in a sense, worry about shareholders, but we do have stakeholders, and anyone who attends CES is a stakeholder. And I tell our staff, they own the show. I know we do legally, but the people that come and believe in it, we have to make it. They're making an investment. They're getting on. We have 45,000 people that come from just outside the United States. They're getting on airplanes. I know there was an era when people loved doing that. I'm realistic to know that that's not the case now. Having said that, actually, flying is great. The CEO of Delta Airlines, Ed Bastian, has written the foreword to this book that I've written. So I want to make sure that's very clear that we believe in it. I don't want to say the wrong thing about that, because especially Delta, it's a great airline. Having said that, is that when people come to see us, we want to give them a great experience. And so innovation is what motivates us. And as a leader, I don't view my job as particularly difficult. I've gotten some questions lately, like, how do you deal with all the different aspects of your job and the stress? And I realize I don't have a lot. I don't get stressed out about my job a lot. I mean, occasionally things happen I have to pivot on, and I can do that. I get stressed about like politics and my family and things like that. That's what stresses me out, is, the world situation. It's tough right now. So those things are big issues. And maybe it's because I have a lack of control over them, that, I can't influence them. And that's what annoys me, because there seem to be answers there.
You touched on company culture as an important driver for this. And I guess established companies very often struggle to create the startup mindset. You were talking about the fact that entrepreneurs very often have the edge in this world when it comes to technology. So how do established companies stay agile and innovate and create this startup mindset?
Well, that's a great question. So, and we talk about it all the time, especially, in the last few years in the United States, we've had a chairman of the Federal Trade Commission who is very young, doesn't have any business experience, and she has taken a very strong position that big companies should not be able to buy small companies. And that's been devastating in terms of raising capital, because who's going to invest in a small company if that major exit is foreclosed? And it's not to say one thing. 80% of our company members are small companies. And in fact, our last chairman ran a VC, among other things, including his own set of portfolio companies. And our new chairman just has a few employees. And our next chairman is actually, ironically, from Amazon. But the reality is that those everyone agrees on one thing, and that's big companies should be allowed to buy small companies. So how do you keep that a big company? Every big company faces the same issue of keeping it fresh. And I'm sure, and I know CEOs worry about that. How do they make those big decisions? The more important you are in a company, the less you're worried about getting the FedEx out that day or the day's problem. You're focused on the long-term strategy. And the long-term strategy in a rapidly changing world, I mean, your assumptions can change and you have to pivot. So one way is, it's called the classic maker. I know you're familiar with this, given all that you've written, the make or buy decision. Do you make it internally or do you buy it?
Mm.
And that's why I'm saying buying small companies is part of it. That's why I don't want to make this a sales pitch for CES, because other trade shows are great also. But at CES, we have this special area for startups, and we actually do try to make it as easy as possible, and we subsidize it. And they just have to show up with their idea and be there for 4 days and talk to a lot of people. But the reason we do it is we're also serving our big companies that are exhibitors. But big companies not only may want to buy a small company, they may want to invest. They may want to mentor. They may want to be the first customer to bring them along so they can both learn together, and then they can make a decision about whether they want to invest or buy. So the synergy is so important, and we're seeing it destroyed in the United States, which is really difficult. And when it doesn't succeed in the United States, our FTC chair has convinced Europe to get involved. An example of that is Amazon wanted to buy this great little company that started with these 3 MIT grads over 30 years ago for robots, iRobot. They have the Roomba, and they had the dominant share in the world of home robots, vacuum cleaning. And they were stopped by our own FTC chairman going to Europe and convincing the European Commission they should try to oppose it. So their competition is the Chinese. So the day that happened, and then the Europeans announced that this is what they're doing, the CEO went back to Massachusetts, where they had 1,200 employees, I believe, and he laid off 300 of them. And they're struggling. And Amazon, I've never seen the CEO of Amazon. Saw him on one of the business TV shows. He was just angry about it. It's just the wrong thing to do. And the big companies oppose it. The small companies oppose it. But it's small companies are the seed corn of the innovation in any country. It's tough to just create a big country. As Bill Gates once told me, every big company started small. And he thanked me for having CES. And then also there was Comdex at trade shows, where he really was allowed to start small and grow his company in a very efficient way. And that's important. So small companies have an advantage over big companies in terms of moving quickly. So if you're a big company, first is self-awareness. Second is dealing with small companies. Third is, as I mentioned, the Steve Jobs technique of creating a skunk works. A number of CEOs, they go and they isolate themselves, or they bring their key staff and they come up with something. Some say, let's create a strategic plan. I've seen strategic plans several hundred pages long. I haven't created a strategic plan in a while. What we try to do is we try to create, this is where we want to be in 5 years, in 2 pages. And how do we get there? What are our big strategies? And that's it. It's 2 pages. And then we figure it out each year with an operating plan, which is really, the operating plan is more our total company-wide. We have about 150, 160 employees. It's our incentive compensation goals. Everyone's on it. It was, when we started doing it over 20 years ago, it was not at all common in the nonprofit world. It's still pretty rare. But everyone has personal goals tied to those big goals. And by the way, everyone has a say in those goals before they're even seen by our board. It's a staff group that creates them, very specifically tying into the 5-year goals. And then it's something that our board gets to see at the end, and they may question or change some of the goals, but it's generally they stay where they are. And then incentive compensation combined with the mission, I think, is what motivates and has helped contribute to our success.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you have observed that companies fall into when they attempt to pivot, and how can you avoid some of those mistakes?
Well, in the you're back against the wall pivot, you throw a lot of quick Hail Marys, and I remember Monster Cable and Noel Lee, who started this great company and took it to heights, and even had a stadium named after Monster. At the very end, he was trying all sorts of things, and he asked me to come give my response to them, and I listened, and I asked him if I could do it alone with him, but he wanted me to do it in front of his key people, and I felt so uncomfortable. He was creating a new coin to match up that people would buy. I just said, it just smells of desperation. It's a Hail Mary, and it's just not something that's good. You created such a great brand, and you could always license it, which is kind of where they are now. But it's something where the mistakes are, well, I mean, I got to give him credit. Like he wanted me to come. He wanted me to tell his people. I still feel bad about it. I feel bad telling about it. I feel like I'm speaking out of school a little bit. But the mistakes people make are they believe their own um, marketing sometimes. Uh, they have to be honest with themselves is the most common mistake. And then I hate to say it, but when large companies buy small companies, which is I'm very familiar with the frequency of that, the it's a honeymoon.
Hmm.
But usually someone's buying a small company because they wanted to fit into what they're doing. They maybe sometimes they're hiring a team, but they also think the entrepreneur that founded it and took into the height where it's created doesn't usually end up staying with a big company. The honeymoon ends. The big company wants to do things differently, and the person who created the small company that person was the decision maker, and all of a sudden they're not. And it's very difficult for them. So that's another mistake they make. I don't know if the big companies sometimes make mistakes. One of the accusations that I've heard, I haven't seen a lot of it, is that sometimes they buy small companies to just put them in a, just kill their technology. I'm sure it's happened,
Hmm.
and I'm sure that they times for good reasons, sometimes for not. But really, the big companies sometimes kill the innovative atmosphere of the small company. But big companies can afford to make a lot of mistakes that way. If you look at some of the acquisitions, the number of acquisitions, and some of the articles have been written about the big company acquisitions and how many have succeeded. Very few succeed
Mhm.
because they don't thrive in that big company atmosphere.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's quite tragic to watch that happening again and again and again in so many different industries.
Yeah, but if they didn't have the ability to do that, those small companies may not have gotten funding. I
Mm.
mean, that's where I come back to, and that's what I'm trying to convince our US government about.
Mhm. As someone that sits right in the middle of the tech world, you said 1,300 members, lots of organizations working on lots of emerging technologies. Every year when you put together CES, you think about how do we group these together. So I would love to get your perspective on what emerging technologies or what leading edge technologies you are watching that you feel that would play a big role in forcing companies to pivot in the future.
Well, thanks. That's a great question. Thanks for recognizing that we do actually spend a lot of time thinking about it, because our job, we feel, is to expose companies to new things they haven't considered before, to
Mm,
retailers, to new product lines. And we've been very deliberate about it. We did it very carefully with healthcare technology. We've been doing that for well over a dozen years, because we saw the shortage globally of healthcare professionals. We saw how a smartphone had all these sensors in them, which smart people could combine to do all sorts of amazing things. And we knew that the data is out there in healthcare records to really solve fundamental healthcare problems on an individual basis, based on the individual characteristics of a person. And then if using existing AI and then generative AI, certainly it's there. Um, and we've done it with other categories. Content creation, we just announced a content creators portion of the show,
mhm,
along with the content industry generally. We've embraced them. But going forward, certainly we've been talking about artificial intelligence for years and generative AI. Going forward, and we also talked about I want to keep tying those together. So you have artificial intelligence, generative AI, and the next thing we're spending a lot of time talking about and dedicating sessions to is quantum computing. So
mhm,
generative AI, could discover a lot of the, for example, the cures in medicine that are drug cures. But can they sift through them all? No. But we believe generative AI and can do that, but quantum computing will do the calculations, knowing the human genome and everything else. They can figure out the likely winners that will solve the
mhm,
real unique to a person healthcare problems. So we see a pathway there. In mobility, we started out with cars and tried to convince the automobile industry that it's just not about how fast you can get a car in how many seconds. It's also about how the brand names that are putting cars, the technologies there, because basically the car companies were slow to shift to new technology. It still takes several years of planning to allow for that. So we pushed that, getting them together, and they've become part of CES. But now it's gone beyond that to mobility, involving mobility of all sorts of vehicles, just not cars, like fire engines and trucks and things like that. And we have Oshkosh, for example, that makes a lot of those devices in the show for the first time. Uh, we have other agricultural companies that are focusing on, the environment in terms of conserving water, conserving seeds, conserving fertilizer, and they're using artificial intelligence. And so our mobility area, the show almost looks like the future. It has all these
Mm.
devices that fly through the air now, whether it's drones or drones with people, or there's fancy names for these things, and there's a lot of experimentation in that. And also there's personal mobility products. So those are things we see in the future coming. My favorite has always been robotics, because I read a lot of science. I should say, I read a lot of science fiction when I was younger. I definitely don't anymore, because I don't think I have the time for it. But we see a lot of, I believe robotics is going to be extremely important. So the CES, that I won't see 50 years from now, I'd love to be able to come back and see. Maybe there's a product for teleportation in time or something like that. That more Star Trek-ish that would come about. But I think we're on a great path. And the reason I think the innovation is important, and we tie this, by the way, into other even bigger things in innovation, like human rights. The world is being divided into categories, if you will, and we're seeing it increasingly. And I've been saying this for a while, but we're really seeing it now, with Russia and China, and basically you're seeing people that believe in human rights and people that believe in don't. And those same worlds, in a sense, are fighting for technology supremacy. So if you look at China, they have one department that gets all healthcare records, over 1 billion records. And that's a treasure trove of data. We sometimes think we're competing with Europe as the United States, and we are. I mean, it's similar landmass, similar population, similar culture values, similar focus on democracy and freedom. But we're really not, because they're our ally on the basic things we hold culturally alike. But Europe's taken a very different position than China. In China, there's no privacy that allows them to exploit generative AI to the max, all that healthcare information and a lot of other data on people. Europe is focused on privacy suitably. So my argument in the US is we have to balance privacy and individual rights, but we have to recognize this is a globally competitive world, and we should be working as close as possible with our allies in Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, a whole bunch of other countries that are out there that share our values. And that way because no one's going to be able to do all this new technology with quantum and generative AI, robotics, mobility, healthcare on their own. So we have to share and do its best. And we actually did a study and said, here's how, in terms of semiconductor production, the world should be broken down among our allies. And we're trying to convince our own government, whether, it doesn't matter which administration, they seem to be fighting. Both parties seem to be not very outward reaching lately. And our job is to try to make them outward reaching and recognize that we have to cooperate with other like-minded countries in the world and treat our allies well and share not only military strength for what we believe in, but also the fundamental innovation, research and development, so we can have economic strength. And so, we're not living in a world where we all are ranked socially the way China is, and that determines whether we can travel, where we are in social date sites, all sorts of things, for jaywalking and paying bills late, and what our social postings are, which is the reality in China today.
Yes, it's definitely a massive challenge to get this right and use these amazing technologies for ethical reasons that actually progress our world. You touched on a number of big technology innovations like AI, especially generative AI, quantum computing, robotics. I also see the world of immersive technology emerging. What advice would you give leaders who are now in organizations looking at some of these technologies? Because what I see in practice is that lots of organizations are piloting stuff, they're experimenting, but they're not really all in using some of these technologies to rethink their business model, rethink their organization, rethink their products. What advice would you give to leaders who are struggling to decide whether they should pivot or persist with their current strategy?
Well, I love the way you frame that question. And I love your comment about immersive technology. For 20 years, I think I've been saying, I'm glad I don't represent the wallpaper industry because, they're what are they going to be doing when it's going to be screens and immersive technology everywhere? And I'm not sure my vision is the correct one because obviously you could get to immersive technology with glasses and things like that. Um, my as a total aside, my pain point that I'm passionate about is facial recognition technology, which has kind of been culturally banned in the US because Google Glass blew up when it first was showing prototypes on it. But that's something which is very important to people in the visual impaired world, the Alzheimer's world, the people that like me that just can't remember names of people. That's one that facial recognition that's been cut off culturally
Mm,
from developing, and it's a tragedy in my view. But in terms of leaders going forward, I mean, you basically say like immersive technology is a great example. How and when that will take off. There's a lot of question marks there. I think the leader has to figure out what their core strength is and where they can go with that core strength, and what opportunities there are in a changing world environment they could pivot to. And in terms of short term, but in the long term, what opportunities are opening up? Because they're opening up. I mean, I think this era in history will go down as never has there been such a radical transformation in technology and innovation, an opportunity for people to do amazing things. I mean, just the number of billionaires in the world today that didn't exist, 10 or 20 years ago is just testament to the fact that probably most of those have something to do with technology.
mm,
But for a big company to do that, I think the big company, what's their core strength, where are they going, and what fits in with that. But the other side of that is, if they have the resources, how could they invest in some of these startups to learn about the technology and get their foot in the door without spending, their all their capital on it? Because the risk they take is if they put too much money into something,
mm,
it's tough at the beginning of any technology. No one ever gets it right. I mean, even if you look at one of my heroes in the sense of Steve Jobs. I say only in a sense because he wasn't a very nice person, but definitely as a leader and what he did for technology is amazing. But he didn't invent the MP3 player. You know that iPod was there was MP3 players out there. There's a number of them. He just made it look really cool and figured out a way to organize it and make it easy to use. Which is kind of that's what Apple's really good at, is making things easy to use. Same thing with a tablet. He wasn't the first one out there with a tablet. There's plenty of other tablets out there. We've been talking about that gap for years. Same thing with the watch. I mean, there's plenty of watches that we're doing all sorts of stuff. He just made a lot cooler and put a lot more stuff on it in a way that his loyal following could pick it up. So, or I guess I don't want to confuse him and Tim Cook, like who actually had the watch. So the bottom line of it is that it depends on the company and the strength and weaknesses, but it requires a lot of thought, input, talking to people like you and others, and figure out where do we want to go, where do we want to bet, and how much do we want to bet. I'm not a big fan of betting the farm on one thing, though.
mm,
It's just my personal conservative financial nature, how I run my life, how I run our company, and how we even do our show. I mean, I am a more of a, like, even how we do our show. If you think about it, we've grown it in so many different categories. And the thinking was, for us, it's a duty we have to expose people to new categories. But it's also personally, we wanted
mm,
to make sure that we weren't just stuck in one industry and subject to the vagaries of that industry for us to succeed as an organization. And that's been a winning strategy for us. Same thing in Washington. We tie ourselves to a lot of new innovations. And we were there for Airbnb, we were there for Uber and Lyft, and we're there for new things that come along, disruptive innovation. We love getting behind them. Now we're doing the same thing with blockchain currencies. Some of it is just the issue of the day that we can't control, the new stuff that comes in that people naturally try to regulate. So
mm.
I am a invest in a number of different things type of person. So I'm struggling with the question in part because I've never run a company that had a product that they actually sold that
Mm.
was physical or an online product, and had to make those decisions.
Yeah, amazing. Very shortly then, what do you think will be the most significant drivers of change that will require companies and leaders to pivot over the next 5 to 10 years? What would you put into that category?
Well, in the category that I'm involved with a lot, which is AI, generative AI, quantum, electric cars, um, sheer electricity generation.
Mm.
is a huge issue that everyone's been ignoring. We early on decided we're going to devote a part of CES 2025 to that in
Mhm.
terms of our conference program because the numbers don't make it. I mean, all the reality is we haven't talked a lot about it, but the world's shifted to cloud computing, and that requires enormous amounts of energy, requires
Mm.
cooling, requires low cost energy. And the defining thing which occurred recently is Bill Gates, I'm sorry, Microsoft, not Bill Gates, basically bought 3 Mile Island or contracted to having the first nuclear plant resurrected in the US. But now everyone's rushing to do that. Even the people on the green side realize that nuclear is a good answer. So that's the biggest issue. But in terms of, to me, what they should be thinking about, what they should be doing, it's don't put all your eggs in one basket, but figure out, draw the chart for 5 or 10 years from now where things are going to be, which people are not very good at. I mean, our government's not good at it with a budget. We haven't been good at it with electricity usage or even how electric cars will be deployed. We're making decisions on the basis of short-term trends and ideas, and that's not healthy. So you have to figure out where, as we say in ice hockey, what Wade Gretzky said, you know, go to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. And you miss every shot you don't take. So both those put together, spread your risk around, be reasonable, but be different.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Gary. That was really enjoyable. Anyone who ever wants to rewatch this, simply head to my YouTube channel or to any podcast platform where you can listen to the audio only version of this. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great talk.